This is a full story. Kitten wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. My wife is a university professor and often goes out late at night to tutor her students. But that day, I accidentally saw her chat history with one of her students. It turned out that the assignments he sent daily were videos of them playing cards together. "Teacher, I've mastered last time's moves. When will you come and check my progress?" In the video, my wife's bold posture and seductive gaze were something I had never seen before. In the dimly lit room, I was staring at the computer screen. On the video, the woman in red lace lingerie posed provocatively, and soon, the man threw her onto the bed. The sounds coming from them were enough to make anyone's blood boil, and my nails dug deep into my palms. If the woman wasn't my wife, maybe I'd enjoy watching it too. But the problem was, my body shook with anger, and the pain of being betrayed made my breathing rough and heavy. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my wife. She said she had arrived at her student's house. I glanced back at the computer screen. In her hurry, she forgot to log out of her WeChat account on the computer. Her replies to the student were filled with the kind of seduction she never showed me. "Open the door for your teacher. I'm coming to see how well you've studied." My breath caught in my throat, and I finally shut my eyes, unable to accept it anymore. I married my wife 2 years ago. She's a professor, and I inherited my family's business. When we first met, she was particularly passionate towards me. Our transition from dating to marriage went smoothly. But about a year ago, she started becoming distant. She still remembered my birthday and showed me care in her free time. But because I had seen her passionate side before, I was especially sensitive to her coldness. I thought it was because we had been together too long and lost the spark from when we first dated. So today, I prepared a lavish candlelight dinner after work, even picked a movie to relive our past. However, when she came home, she seemed distracted, constantly looking at her phone. When I suggested we get intimate, she turned me down, claiming she still had work to finish. Now, I finally understood. She wasn't distant because of anything else. She was just full from someone else's plate, leaving no appetite for me. I leaned back in my chair and let out a heavy sigh. Helplessness and exhaustion washed over me all at once. I didn't know what to do. She had cheated, and I should divorce her and end this relationship. But after dating for 2 years and being married for 2 years, she's the first woman I've ever loved. I just couldn't accept ending it this way. The memory of the day I proposed to her kept playing in my mind. She stood in front of me, blushing, tears in her eyes, her trembling hands revealing her nervousness. I had planned that proposal for a month, but when the time finally came, I was so nervous that I almost lost my voice. A simple sentence took me so long to finally say. When I slipped the ring onto her finger, I couldn't describe how I felt. To me, there may never be a moment more worth remembering in my life than that one. But now, everything was ruined. "Uncle." Just as I was lost in thought, a weak voice pulled me back to reality. I looked toward the door and saw Haley, pale, leaning against the doorframe in her white pajamas. She's the daughter left behind by my late brother. Though I'm only 7 years older than her, I've been taking care of her since she was young. "Haley, what's wrong?" I quickly set aside my wife's situation and rushed to her side. Haley swayed and fell into my arms, her loose pajamas exposing her pale skin, making it hard for me to look directly. "Uncle, my head hurts. I feel terrible." Serena's temperature was higher than usual, and I couldn't focus on anything else. I wrapped my arms around her waist. The girl had developed well, and even through her clothes, I could feel her slender and soft figure. But I had no time to think about that. "Serena, I'll take you to the hospital now." Her eyes were closed, her brows slightly furrowed, and her flushed face was delicate, making her look pitiful. I supported her as we hurried outside and quickly got into the car. The hospital was located downtown, about half an hour away, but since it was late at night, the roads were relatively clear, avoiding any traffic. While waiting at a red light, I reached out to touch Serena's forehead again. Unexpectedly, she suddenly opened her eyes. Under the dim streetlights, her amber eyes shimmered like a clear forest lake, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do. Just as I was about to withdraw my hand, Serena grabbed my wrist. Her voice was soft, with a slightly uneven breath due to her illness. "Uncle, please don't stay with Haley anymore, okay?" Her words took me by surprise. Before I could respond, she continued, "I heard everything from outside." Her eyes held a trace of sadness. The scene I had pushed aside, the sound of Haley's sweet moans and that young man's angry grunts, suddenly flooded back into my mind, making my head spin. I pulled my hand away and avoided Serena's gaze. "This is a grown-up issue. You don't need to think about it. I'm not a child anymore. I'm in college. I know what's going on. Uncle, all these years, don't tell me you haven't felt anything about me." Serena's voice grew louder, almost desperate, as if my response had hit a sore spot. She grabbed my hand and placed it on her chest. Her burning skin made my mind go blank. Her heartbeat was fast and intense. She stared straight at me, her lips pressed together, her eyes filled with sincerity and intensity, almost scorching my gaze. She didn't need to finish her sentence. I understood what she meant, but she's my brother's daughter. My thoughts were in chaos, completely unprepared for her sudden confession. Fortunately, a car horn broke the tense atmosphere. I quickly withdrew my hand and turned back to focus on driving. But then again, Serena was already 20 years old, no longer the little girl who used to play with dolls. Still, when Rocky's grandfather adopted me, and my brother treated me so well, if I made a move on Serena, wouldn't that make me no different from a beast? Before my brother passed away, his only wish was for Serena to live a happy and peaceful life. As my thoughts whirled, we finally arrived at the hospital. Serena had already fallen asleep from the fever in the passenger seat. I let out a small sigh of relief, at least spared from the awkwardness of facing her for the moment. Carefully, I carried her into the emergency room, explaining the situation to the nurse before she was placed on a drip. I sat beside her, keeping a close eye on her condition. But just then, a familiar voice caught my attention. "I told you not to be so rough, and now look what happened. I have to come to the hospital." I whipped my head around toward the direction of the voice. There, I saw a woman in an oversized t-shirt sitting in a chair, her hands placed on her stomach, her face pale. Beside her, a man with a smug expression was apologizing profusely, his hands clasped together. "I'm sorry, Haley. It's just that your moans were so wild, I couldn't help myself." "You dare say that?" Haley raised her hand as if to hit him, but the smile on her face was impossible to hide. My hand clenched tightly around the armrest, and I could feel my blood boiling. Even though I had already seen the video, that was just a recording. Now, watching Haley act like a love-struck girl, playfully teasing her student, I felt a surge of rage mixed with jealousy. I was jealous of that man, who had so easily stolen Haley away from me. Not just her body, but the love she once gave me was now gone as well. Perhaps it was because my gaze was too intense, but Haley seemed to sense something was wrong. She turned her head, and the moment her eyes met mine, her expression froze. "Rocky," she muttered, her already pale face turning ashen, like someone close to death. Seeing that she had noticed me, I decided not to pretend like nothing had happened. I stood up and walked toward Haley. Just as I was about to speak, Haley, perhaps feeling guilty, quickly said, "I was giving a lesson to my student, but I started feeling unwell, so he accompanied me to the hospital." "Tony, this is my husband, Rocky." Tony, who was sitting beside Haley, squinted his eyes as he looked me up and down. It was a silent challenge between men, and Tony made no effort to hide it. He stood up, smiling, and extended his hand toward me. "Nice to meet you." As I shook Tony's hand, I sized him up as well. He was indeed young. His face bore no marks of time, and his eyes were transparent, unable to conceal his intentions. Unlike me, who had been worn down by the world, now accustomed to playing along with people's facades. Even now, though I was fully aware of their relationship, I hadn't torn down the last veil of pretense. Perhaps that's what Haley saw in Tony, his simplicity. As Haley fumbled for words, the nurse arrived with the test results. "Miss Serena, Your results are out. You have a mild ruptured jaundice." I couldn't help but laugh. Any adult would understand what a ruptured jaundice means. Haley took the report from the nurse, and once the nurse left, she looked at me with a complicated expression. At that moment, I couldn't tell whether the expression on my face was a smile or tears. A ruptured jaundice. Quite a serious condition. "Haley, would you care to explain how you managed to get this illness?" Haley opened her mouth, as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she remained silent. It was Tony who spoke up, casually putting an arm around Haley's shoulders and looking at me smugly. "Sorry, Rocky. I got a little carried away and hurt Miss Haley. I promise I'll be more careful next time." His words were suggestive, and the smug smirk on his face made the anger that I had been holding back finally erupt. I shouted, "I'm talking to my wife. Why are you butting in?" There weren't many patients in the emergency room, but my raised voice quickly attracted everyone's attention. Realizing I had lost control, I tried to calm my breathing and regain my composure. But Haley's next words plunged me into despair. "Why are you yelling, Rocky? Tony is just a kid." In that moment, Haley chose Tony over me, without hesitation. She furrowed her brows, looking at me with an expression full of dissatisfaction. It hit me then. I hadn't realized how long it had been since those eyes, once full of love, had last looked at me. In that moment, all my anger dissipated, replaced by a sense of exhaustion. With a bitter smile, I asked, "A kid? I've never seen a kid who could cause a ruptured jaundice." Bringing up the injury again made Haley's face flush with embarrassment. She snapped back, "Enough, Rocky." "Yes, I cheated. So what?" For years now, both of us have been too busy with work to even sit down and talk. Tony is different from you. All his time belongs to me. He's simple, no mind games. And most importantly, he's younger than you. Haley rattled off a string of complaints, as if everything was my fault. But she seemed to forget that, in the beginning, I was young too. I used to revolve around her world as well. Back then, we had no money, only endless amounts of time. When Rocky's grandfather entrusted me with the company, it was just a small business. At the time, Haley was just an ordinary university lecturer, often staying up late grading papers. Back then, my only motivation to make money was so Haley wouldn't have to struggle. Now, I had the money, but the person I worked so hard for had drifted away. I looked at the two of them standing together, and for a moment, I couldn't find the words to say. At this point, it seemed that whatever I said would be in vain. But just as I was sinking into despair, a hand slipped around my arm. I looked down in surprise to see Serena, who had woken up at some point, now standing by my side. She smiled sweetly at Haley and said softly, "Auntie, so you do know you're getting old. Look at your face. Haven't spared any expense on skincare, have you? But no matter how much money you spend, age is age. You'll never beat a young girl's energy, am I right? My uncle has money and status, and there are plenty of women lining up to marry him, even girls as young as 18. Unlike you, who can only trick college students. Because once they graduate, you'll be nothing more than an old woman to them." I had no idea Serena could be so sharp-tongued. Her innocent, delicate appearance contrasted sharply with the way she reduced Haley to trembling rage. It was as if Haley was on the verge of coughing up blood. Meanwhile, Tony's eyes were glowing. "Why, you're Serena?" Serena frowned at him, clearly not recognizing him. But Tony, oblivious to the awkwardness, continued eagerly, "It's me. I'm Tony. We're in the same Wednesday philosophy class, remember? In a class with over 100 students? Why would I remember you?" Serena scoffed, rolling her eyes. I knew she was quite popular at school, but I hadn't realized even Tony was one of her admirers. Seeing Serena's dismissive attitude, Tony quickly removed his arm from around Haley. He took a step toward us, trying to close the distance, his tone growing more urgent. "Serena, you misunderstood. I was just here to accompany Miss Haley for her checkup. There's nothing between us. And besides, Haley is way older than me. How could I possibly like her?" Tony was sweating, his panic evident, but Serena had no interest in him. She wrinkled her nose in disgust. "Why are you telling me all this? Are we close?" The moment Serena spoke, Tony's face went pale. But no one looked more devastated than Haley, who stood behind him, her lips trembling. Tony seemed to want to explain further, but Serena didn't give him the chance. She raised her hand, looking at me with a pout. "Uncle, look, I'm bleeding." Serena had pulled out the 4-needle, and now blood was seeping from the puncture. Panicking, I grabbed her and rushed to find a doctor. As I turned to leave, I paused for a moment, without looking back. "Haley, let's get a divorce." Divorce had been inevitable ever since I saw that video. But when the reality truly unfolded before me, I still felt dazed. Haley packed her things on the same day we collected our divorce certificates. To preserve the last shred of dignity in our marriage, she didn't take anything that originally belonged to me. On moving day, Tony came to help her. Haley wore sunglasses, acting high and mighty. "Rocky, you better think this through. At your age, it's hard to remarry. They won't be like me. They'll only want your money." Just as I was about to reply, Serena strode forward and yanked Haley's sunglasses off. "How ridiculous. Isn't everything you have from my uncle? Even these sunglasses are a gift from him, right?" Haley's face darkened, but she pretended not to care. "So what? I was his wife. He should have bought me these things." "Your uncle only knows how to work. Whoever ends up with him is doomed. Young men are better. At least they know how to love and keep a woman happy." Haley sneered, looking me up and down with disdain. Before I could get angry, Serena already seemed like an enraged cat. "You don't know anything about love. My uncle is handsome and rich. He'll be much happier without you. You can just spend your life in a rented apartment with your young boyfriend." Seeing the argument about to escalate, I quickly pushed Haley out the door. As I closed it, I sighed and asked Serena, "Isn't today Tuesday? Why are you back now? How could I miss such an important day like your divorce? And besides, to show concern for a lonely elder, I applied to move back home from school. How about that? Am I not the most kind-hearted, lovable person?" Serena smiled, hands behind her back, tiptoeing as she looked up at me. Her eyes sparkled like stars in the night sky. I awkwardly looked away, knowing very well why Serena wanted to move back. She used to live at home, but moved to campus after I married Haley, claiming she wanted to make more friends. At the time, I really thought she wanted to grow up and gain independence. I never realized it was because of my marriage. But now that I understood Serena's feelings, I felt it was necessary to make things clear. I took a deep breath and said seriously, "Serena, I think we need to talk." Before I could finish, Serena pressed a finger lightly to my lips. She smiled, her gaze tender and filled with a love that seemed to wrap around me like a web. "I know what you're about to say, Uncle, but we're not blood related, and you're only 8 years older than me. Why won't you try to give it a chance?" "Uncle, I haven't even done anything, and you're already sentencing me like this. Isn't that a bit unfair and hasty?" There was a pleading sincerity in her eyes. I couldn't bear to see her looking so pitiful, and a small part of me hoped that maybe this was just a passing phase for her. In the end, I nodded and agreed. "But let's be clear, I'm only giving you a chance, not agreeing to be with you. And if you fall for someone else along the way, just let me know." Serena tilted her chin slightly, looking adorably defiant. "Who do you think you're underestimating, Uncle? I'll definitely win you over." She threw that challenge at me and then quickly dashed away. Watching her bouncing off, I couldn't help but shake my head with a smile. She's still just a kid after all. But I never expected that Serena would go so far, just to be with me. Half a month after the divorce from Haley was my birthday. Serena specifically reminded me to come home early that day. I originally thought her enthusiasm would fade quickly, but surprisingly, during this half month, she personally cooked for me and even surprised me by picking me up from work. Although she almost burned down the kitchen because she didn't know how to cook, and said she would pick me up, but ended up needing me to drive home. She prepared gifts, but got scammed out of tens of thousands online, crying and demanding pocket money from me. She offered to trim the garden, but ended up cutting my hard-won roses to the ground. Still, everything Serena did came from a good heart. Seeing her messages, I couldn't help but laugh. Let's push the rest of today's work to later. You all can leave work early. My secretary looked surprised at my words. After all, to all the employees, I was just a workaholic. But who would refuse such a good thing as leaving early? Afraid I might change my mind, my secretary dashed away. Just as I was about to drive home, I unexpectedly ran into Haley at the company entrance. After not seeing her for half a month, Haley seemed a bit haggard. She was about my age, usually not showing signs of aging at this stage, but the dark circles under her eyes were especially pronounced. Even makeup couldn't hide them. She clearly saw me, instinctively lowering her head to avoid me. Seeing there was no way to escape, she could only muster a greeting. Long time no see. I nodded expressionlessly. Half a month was enough for me to sort out my feelings. Although facing Haley again, I no longer felt the anger and pain from discovering her infidelity. The harm done was irreversible, so naturally, I didn't have a pleasant expression for Haley. She smiled wryly and said, "If I remember correctly, today is your birthday." Yeah. I didn't feel the need to engage in a conversation with Haley, so I simply nodded, ending the topic. But clearly, Haley wasn't going to let me leave so easily. She hesitated, looking at me, finally saying, "Rocky, we've been together for so long. We have feelings. What I did back then was wrong. Can you?" I frowned, already guessing what Haley wanted to say. But before she could finish, I heard a familiar voice coming from a distance. "Haley, what are you doing here? Hand over the money." Tony strode toward us, grabbing Haley's sleeve, blatantly trying to snatch money from her bag. Haley desperately tried to stop him, looking exhausted as she said, "Didn't I just give you living expenses a few days ago? How did you spend it all?" "What do you know? That little bit of money is gone after just a few nights at the bar. You said you were rich. Hurry up and give me some." "Tony, don't go too far." Haley snatched her bag back, panting as she looked at Tony. Seeing her reluctance to give money, Tony sneered. "Haley, are you regretting it now? Let me tell you, it's too late. If you don't give me money, I'll tell everyone about you and me, ruining your reputation. By then, don't expect to meet anyone, let alone be a college professor." Haley's face turned pale at his words. She turned to me, looking for help, as if hoping I would sort this out. "Rocky, I..." Before Haley could finish, a soft hand looped around my arm. "Uncle, why are you still here? Didn't we agree to go home to celebrate your birthday?" Serena smiled sweetly at me, but I could see a hint of warning in her eyes. For some reason, I felt a bit guilty. I touched my nose and said to Haley, "Sorry, I have things to do. You two can sort this out." I took Serena to the car, ignoring Haley's reaction, and pressed the gas pedal to speed away. In the car, I explained to Serena about the encounter with Haley, and her expression finally looked a little better. As soon as I opened the door at home, I saw a table full of dishes. Serena walked up to me and smiled. "Happy birthday, Uncle." I was a bit surprised. "Did you make all this?" "Of course. I've been cooking all day. Come on, taste it and see how it is." Serena pulled my hand, leading me to sit by the table. She rested her chin on her hands, and under her expectant gaze, I took a small piece of steak. It was tender and juicy, perfectly cooked, and delicious. I nodded, praising, "It's really good. You've improved so fast." Serena seemed to breathe a sigh of relief and picked up the glass of red wine in front of her. "Uncle, I wish you happiness every day from now on." I smiled and gently clinked glasses with her. "You too." With complete trust in Serena, I drank the wine without any guard. I didn't notice the excited glimmer in Serena's eyes. Not long after finishing the wine, I felt dizzy. Before I could figure out what was happening, I collapsed onto the table. When I woke up again, I found my hands tied to the headboard. and Serena was straddling me. "Serena, what's going on? What do you want?" I tried to struggle, but I had no strength. Serena's face was flushed, her breathing uneven. She slowly leaned down, her hair falling over my neck. "Uncle, I didn't want this, but it's been too long. I can't wait anymore." Before Dad passed away, he hoped I would find happiness, but how can I be happy without being with you? As she spoke, she already pulled down the zipper of her dress. I quickly shut my eyes, anxiously saying, "Serena, listen to me, you're still young. You'll meet all kinds of people in the future. The feelings you have for me now are just a fleeting emotion. It's because you've been with me since you were little." "That's not true. No." Before I could finish, Serena interrupted me. She cupped my face in her hands, her voice even carrying a hint of tears. "Uncle, open your eyes and look at me. Look at Serena." Serena's voice sounded increasingly clear in the dark world. Like a whisper from Medusa, I knew what would happen if I opened my eyes, but I couldn't resist such temptation. I opened my eyes, meeting her tear-filled gaze. "Do you know, Uncle? I've loved you since I was 16. But I didn't dare to tell you. I was afraid you would hate me, push me away, and even hate me. No one knows that the day you married Haley was the most painful day of my life. I watched my favorite man marry someone else, helpless, having to smile and give my blessings. You said my future is long, but no one is better for me than you. Uncle, don't treat me like a little girl. See me as a woman. I'm begging you." Tears fell from Serena, dropping onto me, each like a burning flame. She cried pitifully, while I remained silent, not uttering a word. I watched Serena grow up, hoping only for her happiness. But as Serena said, whoever she followed, I wouldn't believe she would be happy. Who besides me would risk everything to treat her well? And if I'm honest with myself, after all these years, could I truly say there was no romantic feeling towards Serena? If that were the case, why did I feel so angry when I saw a boy confessing to her, to the point of losing control and beating him up? And why did I fall in love with Haley at first sight? For having the same clear amber eyes as Serena? My silence gradually dimmed the light in Serena's eyes. In a hoarse voice, she said, "I know your answer now, But just as Serena was about to get off me, I flipped her over, pinning her down. She looked at me incredulously, her black hair scattered across the bed. "Serena, ties aren't meant to be used like this, you know?" The night on my birthday was still long. It turned out Serena was merely a verbal giant. When it came to action, she would cry and call me a jerk. But that's okay. All these things she learned were from me. I felt that I could teach her this too. Since that day, Serena and I have officially started dating. However, I didn't let Serena make it public. After all, she is still in school, and our relationship is somewhat awkward. I don't want her to get hurt. After being with me, Serena has clearly become more clingy and more spoiled. She often cries because she doesn't want to leave me for school. After I comforted her a couple of times and promised to pick her up from school, she finally managed to hold back her tears. I didn't expect that such behavior would lead Serena into a whirlwind of public opinion. Suddenly, an anonymous post appeared on Serena's school website, claiming that she was with an older man for money. She had already attracted a lot of attention in school because of her looks, and once this post was published, it quickly garnered many likes and comments. Some even slandered Serena, saying they had seen her going to a hotel with an older man. The rumors grew increasingly outrageous in their mouths. By the time I found out, some were even claiming that Serena was selling herself. Looking at those absurd statements, I was so furious that my hands were shaking. How dare they use such words to slander that little girl, who I couldn't bear to speak harshly to? But compared to my anger, Serena appeared rather calm. I should have known who did this. I've been receiving strange gifts and messages left on my desk lately. I threw away everything he gave me that day and posted on my social media, and then this incident happened. Serena leaned against me while eating a lollipop. I called my secretary and asked him to find out who posted anonymously as quickly as possible. Anyone who dares to do such a thing should bear the consequences. I gently stroked Serena's head, feeling sorry for her. If I had known this would happen, you should have just revealed your identity when you went to school. When Serena first started college, she asked me to hide our relationship, hoping to make true friends. At that time, no one expected such a thing would happen, so I went along with it. Looking back now, I really regret it. Serena looked up at me and smiled. "Uncle, are you feeling sorry for me now?" I playfully pinched her nose. "What else could it be? Since you care so much about me, can I stay on top tonight?" "Absolutely not." Serena's smile immediately disappeared, and she pouted, glaring at me fiercely. "You old man who cares about appearances. Even if I'm an old man, it's you who chose me. Now you want to run away? It's too late." My secretary didn't make me wait long. About half an hour later, he provided me with the results. But I never expected that the person sending gifts to Serena and posting was actually Tony. This is Haley's cheating partner. Why is he sending me gifts? Serena looked at the photo of Tony on my phone with a puzzled tone. I sneered, "Of course, it's to eat from both sides." Having confirmed the other party's identity, I quickly gathered all the evidence of his unrequited love for Serena. As the president of the group, I issued a statement. In the statement, I publicly revealed Serena's identity for the first time, responding to the recent false information online, and posted the lawyer's letter from the company regarding Tony, stating that we would pursue this matter to the end. When Tony saw the lawyer's letter, he panicked. But he didn't dare to come see me himself, so he could only ask Haley to negotiate with me. When Haley was brought in by the butler, I was feeding Serena. She had become increasingly picky and wouldn't touch even a bit of carrot. If she got angry, she'd pinch my face, looking pitiful, questioning whether I still loved her. There was nothing I could do about her. Upon seeing this scene, Haley immediately froze. I only noticed her when the butler reminded me, and Serena got off my lap. She clung to my arm, watching Haley warily. "You're here for Tony, right?" "Yes." Haley forced a smile at me. She looked thinner, and even her makeup was gone, making her appear older by at least 10 years. After learning that Tony was the anonymous poster, I also had a detective investigate what had happened with Haley after our divorce. After moving out of my house, Haley began living with Tony. As a college student, she was in a playful phase, and Tony's family situation was average, with only $1,500 a month for living expenses, which was not enough for him to enjoy life. Without money, he would reach out to Haley for support. When Haley was with me, I would give her tens of thousands for living expenses each month, so she had extra money to support Tony. But after our divorce, she could only rely on her salary to get by. Once or twice was okay, but after several times, Haley couldn't afford to give him that much anymore. So she wanted to break up with Tony, but he was stubborn, threatening that if she dared to break up with him, he would expose how she seduced him under the guise of tutoring. At that time, Haley would lose her job. With no choice, Haley had to compromise. To earn more money, she had to teach online after work, and over time, her energy had clearly diminished. Rocky, Tony is still a student. He isn't a bad person by nature. Listening to Haley's words, I sneered. Not a bad person? Just because Serena rejected his confession, he came up with such a vicious plan. How is that not a bad nature? Haley, I see you're infatuated with his looks, losing sight of right and wrong, and yet you call yourself a university professor. Haley's face flushed with shame for my words. She bit her lip, lowering her gaze. She knew Tony's true nature, but now she was deeply trapped with no way out. Rocky, can't you consider our past feelings? Stop right there. We have no feelings. If anything, it's only the feeling of you cheating on me. Go back. I will definitely pursue this matter with Tony to the end. The hope in Haley's eyes completely vanished. Perhaps realizing she wouldn't gain anything from me, she ultimately left in a huff. Tony's actions also alarmed the school authorities. He was given a suspension as punishment. On the day the punishment was handed down, I happened to be dropping Serena off at school. At the school gate, before Serena got out of the car, I saw a crowd making a fuss over something. I heard a man screaming in a fit of rage. "Damn it, you can't even handle this small matter. Can't you just sleep with him once, and this would all be over? Haley, weren't you the best at sleeping with men?" This was clearly Tony's voice. Serena and I exchanged glances and got out of the car. In the center of the crowd, Haley was rolling on the ground with a twisted face, sweating profusely and howling in pain. Tony, on the other hand, was clearly enraged, paying no attention to the crowds watching or Haley's pleas for mercy. Breathing heavily from the fight, he still showed no signs of stopping. It wasn't until the school officials rushed over that things began to settle down. Serena and I stood at the edge of the crowd, and she sighed. "Do you think this counts as Haley's own doing?" Probably. In the end, the farce resulted in the exposure of Haley and Tony's relationship. Tony firmly claimed that Haley had seduced him first. As a university professor, creating such a scandal meant the school could no longer employ her. Haley left the school with Tony. As for where they went afterward, I had no idea. It wasn't until 2 years later, when Serena graduated from college, that I heard from other students about Tony and Haley's current situation. After dropping out, Tony didn't pursue his studies any other way. Instead, he completely became a thug. The beating Haley received made her realize she was pregnant with Tony's child. She had wanted to live a good life with him, but unexpectedly, Tony dumped her in the hospital. He said he was only playing with her, and that this aging woman with a faded complexion didn't deserve him. Later, Tony started to drift among wealthy women, using his sweet words to scam quite a bit of money. However, just a few days ago, he was stabbed 3 times by Haley in public. I heard he didn't die on the spot, but he injured his spine and will never be able to stand again. What about teacher Haley? Of course, she was sent to prison. You know, teacher Haley really should have known better. After so many years of studying to finally become a professor, she ended up in this situation. Exactly. I heard her previous husband was a boss. I really don't know what she was thinking. What are you daydreaming about? Serena laughed as she linked her arm with mine. I snapped back to reality and gently touched her head. Nothing, just congratulations to our little girl for graduating. I finally graduated. Do you think that means I'm an adult now? Yes, you're already at the age where you could get married. Rocky, does that count as a proposal? Probably, I guess. The end. If you like Kitten's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.